I thought I'd make this video about gang stalking. Hey, that's apparently a thing. What a relief! What a relief! You see, I was told I suffered from this condition, right, where I was paranoid that the government was monitoring and surveilling me. And obviously, the way the government deals with that is by monitoring and surveilling me. I try and keep a sense of humor. It's kind of the only way that I've been able to stay alive. If you're someone that believes that you're a targeted individual, and or if you're just interested in the subject after seeing like this Vice things that have been put out and whatnot, you can look back at this channel. And there's a whole bunch of videos. Now, I'm not using the terminology gang stalking, but the experience is very real. Now, the thing is, I don't know how widespread, the program is. But I do know that it started to affect me around the time of the G20 protests in Toronto here. I was at the G20 protests, and I did a lot of work online before the protests, writing my political ideas and things like that. And then I was the founding president of a fringe political party, which talked about taking on police corruption and tackling the fiat-based banking sector, and that's kind of you do these type of activist things, and then the gang stalking follows, which is unfortunate, But I'm glad that this community exists, and that there are people that have the courage to talk about what it is that they experience. So, I was diagnosed as having paranoid schizophrenia because I was aware of something called Project Echelon, which is basically the surveillance grid. And I'm interested to speak with other TIs about what they see taking place in the world around them, and what kind of theories they've come up with as a means of trying to explain what it is that's taking place. Because I don't think we're all crazy. I used to think that maybe this is something that's just in my head for a long time. But seeing that there's a lot of other people that are reporting the same kind of instances taking place, it leads me to believe that this program exists, and that people are tortured for the things that they think. We get to a philosophical kind of crossroads where we have to decide things about reality that may contradict what people know, or what people believe. And solipsism, the philosophical concept that each one of us creates our own individual reality separate of others, it is, I think, a flaw. One of the things that I'm just kind of dealing with right now as I'm doing this is I notice that sometimes when I talk about these things, like, it feels like they're fucking, they're gonna pound in the door at any minute. But I know they're not. It's It's the feeling of these things, though, and it's tough. It's tough to I guess balance them, and honestly, I think part of what's made this problem worse is the fact that there is no wider discussion around alternative perspectives of current events and histories. And what I mean by that is like conspiracy theories. You know, these theories, they exist because there's a certain logic to them. And if we're wrong, then we should be able to discuss these things until, you know, our logics have been satisfied that we were mistaken, you know. So and I think another thing that has kind of made this issue worse is that whenever an individual tries to speak about what they're experiencing, there is a knee-jerk hyper reaction to medicate and control this thought, which is the thought of someone that knows that they're in a country that isn't free but pretends to be. And I mean, it's okay if Canada isn't a free country. Just tell people that, you know. Stop pretending that it's free. Because it isn't. In my experience, anyway. This here is a court document, a notice of application that I filed that may be of interest to any other targeted individuals in Ontario. And what it is it's a legal challenge to the validity of the Ontario Mental Health Act. Because various sections of the Ontario Mental Health Act contravene sections of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, whether or not we are actually targeted individuals, if we are just crazy people, I would argue that we have, in a free and democratic society anyways, you should have the right to be crazy. And I think what makes a lot of people's conditions struggling with this phenomenon worse is that there's nowhere to turn, and these facilities that are supposedly designed to help you are actually torture chambers. CAMH stands for Criminals Abusing Mankind Help. Please do not support CAMH. And, you know, it's interesting because when you read through the Mental Health Act, you can see that even these institutions themselves are not following their laws, the laws that are supposed to be governing them. For example, there's a law against psychosurgery, and according to the Act, psychosurgery is defined as anything that interferes with the regular function of the brain. Well, newsflash, most psychotic drugs and SSRIs and things like that, they work by blocking neural transmitters in your brain, which is to say they are interfering with the organic functioning of the brain. Ergo, that is psychological, or that is psychosurgery, and isn't actually covered under the Act, but they do it anyway, right? Because there's no oversight, there's no check and balance. That's the big problem with a giant police state like Canada. Is that there's no oversight over the police. You know, who will police the police? Who's going to check to see if these psychiatrist people are in their right fucking minds to be deciding who is and who isn't in their right mind? because there's a certain point where people's political and religious and esoteric views are getting labeled as mental illnesses, and now these people are receiving forced psychiatric treatment for having the wrong political or religious opinions. It doesn't matter that the United Nations defines that as torture. Canada believes that it can get away with this, and this is part of why I've filed this, what's called a notice. This is a constitutional question, and it's not too hard to do. It just takes a little bit of focus and a little bit of understanding of the law, primarily the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And all you have to do is read through an act that you believe is maybe part of the program. Now, I'd suggest that mental health acts are definitely part of the program, because this is how people's thoughts are being controlled. And this is like the bin, where if your speech or your thought is too far outside of the narrowly controlled margins, you will wind up there, and then they will torture you into submission until you start to believe the government is fine. Everything is perfect in Canada. It's great. Right? That's what they expect. Now, obviously, that isn't what people would expect in a free and democratic society. Being able to be critical of institutions like CSIS, CSEC, the RCMP, the Toronto Police Service, being able to be critical of these organizations, of course the law societies as well, is paramount to having a free and democratic society. Because if we're not able to be critical of the government, then how can the government claim that we have any freedoms? And they can go, oh, well, criticism's fine, but it's just certain types of criticism. That's when you're crazy. And that's how Canada works. And, most Canadians are pretty dumb and brainwashed. I know, because I have a brother that is an optometrist, and he is also very brainwashed and dumb. Sorry, brother. It is what it is. Because he has his Bachelor's of Science in Genetics, okay? And while he was in university for his genetics degree at McMaster, we were talking about the honeybees dying off, and how all the honeybees were dying off. And what I suggested to my brother was that one of the root causes of colony collapse, which is what's killing the honeybees, was the genetically modified corn. And it was, that they had Bt corn toxin spliced into the reproductive organs of the plant, like the stamina. And because of this genetic splicing with the Bt corn toxin, the fact that it got into the plant's reproductive organs means that it would also get into the pollen. And then the bees would go and pick up this pollen, and they take it back to their colonies, and then these colonies would consume the toxic pollen and begin to die off, right? I explained it as that. But he was in the university-controlled paradigm, which is, no, my teachers taught me this was okay, therefore it's okay. Sure, we can go into having a dialogue around advanced mathematics and, calculus and what the eighth dimension may entail, but the issue in academia, especially with this system in place that will arbitrarily label people who think or speak differently as insane, discredits many ideas. And my concern is that the mental health program in general in Canada is kind of editing out the spark of ingenuity and human innovation that basically built civilization in the first place. Because to want to make something more or to question what exists in this day and age is insanity. And so I think that's problematic, right? I don't think that that's correct. So I've done what I can do to fight the power, which is, mounting a legal challenge. Now, I don't know if I'm going to win. I highly doubt it, but I'm going to try. My goal is to get sections 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 53, 54, and 26 of the Ontario Mental Health Act repealed because they violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And for my damages, I'm seeking the sum of $21 million. And I encourage more people to come forward with legal challenges to the system and require huge sums of money to sue the government into submission. I think tactically, what we can do now as targeted individuals is begin to mount court actions against the system and sue the government into bankruptcy. So, that's kind of what I think we can do. And I think, we have to be obviously amendable to what can actually be attained. I think it's safe to say that individuals that are afraid of having their freedoms encroached upon via mental health acts can take comfort in knowing that there was recently a judge appointed from Newfoundland who seems like they would probably be favorable to our cause. You also have to remember that government isn't this big monolithic thing. Everyone within government is working with compartmentalized information and are controlled by this mechanism. And I'd suggest even further so that some of the perps, that are participating in this, a lot of them initially didn't know what they were getting into. I can imagine, I can imagine myself, for crying out loud, going from air cadets to wanting to go work for CSIS to try and do my part to help protect the country, and then finding myself in this clusterfuck rabbit hole of why the fuck am I spying on this guy masturbating in his apartment for 6 hours, right? Like, I try and see the bigger picture of what's going on, but I think it's fairly safe to say that Canada is not a free country. Canada is a police state, and that in order to correct this imbalance of power, things have to be dealt with in a way that is not just one person deciding. As I look out my window here, I see just the movement of traffic patterns, and it's very interesting, being in a city of over 6 million people and watching the way that the traffic moves. Because you can see the distinction between some of these groups, and you have to wonder. I'm not saying that that's always happening, but I do notice when I run into the same people in the same places, and there is something that is indescribable about what it feels like to be targeted, that I think only other targeted people would know. So, that's what this is all about, and I hope you're doing well, and we shall prevail.